Good morning to you, and thank you for joining us today for the ESA Director General's annual press briefing. I'm Anne-Sophie Bradet, the head of the Communication Department of ESA, and I would moderate this briefing. And I would like to take this opportunity, first and foremost, to wish you all a very happy new year before we start. I'm here with Dr. Joseph Aschbacher, the Director General of ESA. Some of our ESA directors are present, some are remotely. We'll start with a presentation of the Director General, and then we'll open the floor to questions. Some journalists are on site, we'll take their questions, but we also have all the journalists connected remotely. So please indicate on WebEx or on the WhatsApp group that you wish to ask a question, and don't forget to state your name and the name of your media. Now, we will also record this press briefing, and it will be available on the website and on our chat within an hour or two. And now I give the floor to Dr. Joseph Aschbacher.
So thank you, Anne-Sophie, and a very warm welcome also from my side. Happy New Year to all of you, and also a big thank you to all of you for the very good reporting you did over the last year to report on the many successes and the many activities we had in ESA. So I'm giving you a short overview as indicated by Anne-Sophie, but let me say I'm doing this together with my directors. We have a very strong team. You see them here on my right-hand side, and some of my director colleagues are connected online. This is really a big teamwork. I have the honor and the pleasure to lead this team, but it's really teamwork that we do. But also let me say as an introduction that this is, of course, work of the European Space Agency, which we do on behalf of our member states, funded by our member states, and for some activities together with the European Commission, also funded by the EU programs. And I will show a bit more in detail of what these various activities are. Let's go to the first slides. Prepared a couple of slides for you to lead you through, and obviously then we have a very good Q&A. The first slide, please, if you could display it. Yes, this shows an overview on what we have done last year. It's only one slide, but I really would like to recall the huge successes we had last year. It is a record in terms of deliverables that we have provided to Europe. That means to our taxpayers, to our citizens, to our politicians, but also to the world. And there's a large number of satellites and rockets that you see here. Let me explain very briefly what we had. We have 13 launches of ESA satellites that we developed. You see them here on this chart. I'm not going through them one by one because you have followed them throughout the year, but this is an absolute record number of satellites that we have launched. Of course, all of these satellites.
I see the waiting loop in with your embed code.
So there's some, all of these satellites, with the exception of Galileo, are unique satellites. So really, they are quite important ones. Of course, all of you have followed the inaugural flight of Ariane 6 on the 9th of July. A huge success, as you have all recorded and reported. And we had the return to flight of Vega C in early December. Again, a very important milestone after 2 years of investigations and 2 years of very hard work by the teams. Then on the left-hand side, you see some highlights on the astronaut side. We had 2 astronaut missions, Hugin and Mugin, both Andy Morgensen and Markus Wandt. So Andy coming back from 6 months on the space station, and Markus being the first ESA astronaut of the reserve on a commercial Axiom mission. I have graduated 5 new career astronauts, and we have opened the lunar facility, which is a unique facility that simulates situations on the moon surface. So as you see here, this is quite significant. I mentioned already this is a record in terms of deliverables we have. Very proud on behalf of the European Space Agency about these successes we have. All the satellites, the rockets, and the other activities are successful. And this is very important to say that our missions all work well. They deliver data, they deliver observations, and all these have very successful missions. And this with a relatively modest budget, which we have in Europe, and I will show the budget situation in a minute. Next slide, please. So what are the highlights of this year? This is one pictogram on one slide, some of the highlights, but I will go a bit more in detail on explaining them one by one and some other activities. As of the 1st of January, we have a new member state, Slovenia, and I will have a big celebration and on the accession of Slovenia tomorrow. Actually, we're traveling with our teams to Ljubljana to celebrate the accession of the 23rd ESA member state. On the launches, we are ramping up the Ariane 6 and Vega C exploitation. We will have a number of launches coming up this year. You will see them later on in a diagram, but this is, of course, now after the inaugural flight and after return to flight, we are now focusing on making sure that these launches are being exploited. It is also important to say that with last year's Ariane 6 and Vega C launch, we are out of the launcher crisis. I have called the launcher crisis 2 years ago when we were really in a very difficult and challenging situation. We are now out of it. Europe has its independent access to space, and we can launch our missions, our satellites with our own rockets as required. We celebrate this year 50 years of ESA, and there will be a number of events throughout the year that will highlight what we have achieved, how we have changed over time. ESA is 50 years old, but is constantly changing. We have a major transformation ongoing. You see in the bottom right this diagram, which really indicates that I have started a transformation process already 2 years ago to be more dynamic, more agile, making sure that we are ready for the challenges that are happening around us outside Europe or within Europe, and making sure that we are fast, not too bureaucratic, that we are lean and very dynamic in responding to the situation as we see it. We have a budget this year of 7.7 billion. I will show you the breakdown in a minute. We will again this year sign about 1,500 contracts or more. If you divide this figure by 200 working days and say 7 days or 5 days a week, we are signing on average a contract an hour. So you see how intense our activity is and how much work we have through our contracts department, our technical directorates, and what we do throughout the year. So extremely busy and extremely large amount of work and activities we do. We continue submitting Copernicus data to the world on behalf of the European Union and the European Commission. A very successful program. You all know it very well, but just to recall that this is one of the largest, if not the largest, data volumes that are being sent to the world every single day. And we are operating a number of satellites. 28 are in operation today, but we are preparing for about 40 missions in the near future. Next slide. Let me go a bit into details. Yes, please, next slide. On the budget, so this is the ESA budget by funding source. That means the income side. Let's start on the right-hand side, the larger picture. You see that we have about 3/4 of the funding of ESA of the 7.7 billion coming from member states, 62% through ESA programs and 13.7% through other income, and about 22%, a bit less than a quarter, from the European Union through agreements which we have with the European Commission, in particular to implement Copernicus, Galileo, and now also IRIS Square and a number of other small activities. Plus a small portion from EUMETSAT, because the EUMETSAT programs are towards the end, both MDG, METOP-SG, and this year's contribution is therefore relatively small, but all these figures, of course, change over the years. On the left-hand side, you see the breakdown by country. I'm not going into them in detail. You get the slides and you will see them. The largest contribution this year comes from France. A big thank you to France, but all the member states for their continued strong contribution and funding of ESA. Of course, all this funding has been obtained through ESA ministerial conferences or other agreements that we have with the various countries or third parties. So you see France, Germany, Italy being the largest, the 3 largest member states in terms of funding contribution. And then you have a number of medium-sized contributions, as we call it, go here from the top of the list, Belgium, Poland, Spain, Switzerland, the UK, which are also significantly contributing. And of course, these contributions are changing over the years. So this is the figure for this year, 2025. The next slide shows the funding or the budget on the spending side. We could move to the next slide, please, where you see the breakdown. Seems there's a technical issue. Now it's here. You see the breakdown of the budgets on how it is allocated within ESA, within the different programs. You see 33%, so 1/3 of the budget is spent within the Earth Observation Directorate. These are the ESA programs, the EUMETSAT programs, and of course the Commission programs, Copernicus in particular, as you see, a very significant amount. And then we have a number of other large programs in the order of 10% more or less, from space transportation to human and robotic exploration, connectivity and secure communication, the science program, navigation, which are funding the various programs. And then, of course, you see all the other activities as they are on this list here on the basis of the 7.7 billion. I recall this is the ESA member state funding, the EU funding, and the EUMETSAT funding. Next slide. This shows an interesting graph, and I really would like to show this to you to give the ESA funding and the ESA budget a bit more in the larger picture. So what you see here is the last 10 years of funding of ESA in the blue curve, the ESA total funding, and the dotted line or the dashed line, the ESA member state funding. But the other three lines are quite interesting. Of course, the NASA funding you see here shown very clearly has increased over the last 10 years from roughly 16 billion to about 25 billion euros. This is all converted to euros for good comparison. You have the Space Force that came in very strongly with the creation of the Space Force in 2019 with a very strong funding. And today's Space Force funding in the US is larger than that of NASA. So you really see that the defense sector has very largely increased its funding share in the United States. And the yellow curve you see is the global private investments from private sources or private funding funded by venture capital companies or funds or other sources. You see very clearly a peak here around 2021. It is slowed down a little bit, but we have recent figures that this will increase again. And I'm pretty sure that there will be also significant funding contribution from the private sector in the future. But the big message here, the big picture is that the ESA budget is relatively modest. It's about 1/3 of NASA's budget. And I've shown you before some of the outputs that we deliver. I think the European member states, our member states of ESA, the European Commission can be very proud, but also very happy with the deliverables we provide for the amount of funding we have. Of course, this is also a call from my side for increase of funding in order to make sure that we keep delivering, we keep making sure that our industry will be successful on the global stage as well. And of course, delivering space infrastructure for Europe and its citizens. Next slide. This is again on the budget, a comparison of the spendings. You see on the left-hand side, the global public spending, which includes the civilian and defense budget. So this is public spending, so not the private funding included. You see the share of the United States is about 64%. You see China about 12%. You see Europe at 11%, and then some of the other funding slices here. Again, the share of Europe is relatively modest in the global scale. But again, I think the output we deliver for this money is quite impressive and quite significant. Another important point, and you see some of the figures also as a portion of GDP. Again, Europe is a bit on the lower end, but this is something that we are all collectively working to increase because space becomes more and more strategic, more and more an economic driver, security driver, but also for the benefits of citizens across Europe. We have to really make sure that our funding levels are increasing accordingly. Also, an ambition is to reinforce the partnership, first, of course, with the European Union, trusted partner, where we work for decades very successfully together. Galileo, Copernicus are the best examples of very successful flagship programs which the European Union and ESA implement together. IRIS² is the next one. But also internationally, we have very strong partnerships, obviously, with NASA, our largest partner in space, but also increasingly, I've put emphasis on increasing our relationships and partnerships with other partners like JAXA, like India, like South Korea or other countries around the world, Australia, ASEAN, and several others. So this is certainly something that we pursue because we want to be a strong partner, a good partner also to our global community. Next slide. This shows some of our important milestones that are coming this year. Of course, the ministerial conference at the end of this year in Bremen in November is the major milestone for us. We are preparing the ministerial package since a bit more than a year now. We are in the midst of this preparation, very successful, very intense interactions with our member states, with the various stakeholders, and this is going very well. Actually, we have started early in the process to be sure that we are well aligned and well on track in this preparation. We also have prepared last year an ESA strategy. It is almost final, but not yet final. We will have a last round of discussions with our member states. We had a very successful discussion with the member states at the December Council, but we expect it to be finalized in the first quarter of this year. And then obviously will be released, and this will guide us until or in the time frame 2040. So that means really a longer term. The ESA strategy 2040 will take over from Agenda 2025, which, as the name indicates, had a limited scope of 4 years. It was linked to my first mandate as Director General, and as you know, this finishes at the end of February this year, but I've got an extension until 29. So the Agenda 25 will lead into the longer-term strategic document of ESA 2040. Of course, the coordination with the European Union is key. There's a new Commissioner for Defense and Space, Mr. Kubilius. I had the pleasure and the honor of already meeting him on several occasions. I have to say that this is a very good and strong relationship that we are having already in the early stages, but certainly something that I'm committed from the side of the European Space Agency to intensify and to work very closely and well together. And certainly this will be a very important aspect of our work throughout this year. And ESA transformation, I've mentioned it earlier. We are in the midst of transforming ESA as an agency. That means in-house with our workforce. We have about 3,000 staff and about 3,000 contractors in ESA working in-house, but also in our relations with industry and interactions with member states in order to be lean, dynamic, and ready for the challenges of the future, as also expressed in the future ESA strategy 2040. Next slide. The strategy 2040 has identified 5 goals. They are listed here, and I would like to lead you or to show the highlights of this year along these 5 goals. So the first one will be protecting our planet and climate, and I will go through them one by one. So the next slide. Starting with protecting our planet and climate. Next slide. Shows some of the highlights we expect this year, 2025, under this heading in this domain. Here you see Earth observation. There are 6 Earth observation satellites we plan to launch this year, or 8 missions. The difference is because some satellites carry 2 missions, in particular Sentinel-4 and MTG S1 is one large satellite, but the Sentinel-4 mission is also a hosted payload on MTG S1. And the same applies to Sentinel-5, which is a hosted payload on METOP SG-A, which we launched this year. As you know, MTG and METOP SG are both missions that we carry out together and with EUMETSAT, our trusted partner for meteorological missions, and there are these 2 hosted payloads. Then we have Sentinel-1D and Sentinel-6B, which we are planning to launch this year. Sentinel-6B, as you recall, is a mission where NASA has an important contribution on this mission, including the launch, which will happen or which is expected towards the end of the year. Earth Explorers are our flagship science missions that are answering unanswered questions of science with technology that is not yet flown in space. The next one to launch is Biomass. As the name indicates, this is looking at biomass globally with a P-band radar. Very amazing mission in terms of knowledge that we will obtain there, which is not available through other sources from space. Then we have on the right-hand side, Hydro-GNSS, which is one of the Scout missions that is being launched. The Scout program, as you may recall, is a series of smaller satellites that are lasting 3 years of development work with a budget of roughly 30 million of industrial contracts, so relatively limited in terms of budget and development time, but very important for science. The science community is evaluating them in order to make sure that these are the ones selected and endorsed by the science community. Plus, as you see on the bottom right, we are launching some of the national missions where we have third-party agreements. I've mentioned the budget before, and here you see the activities that will be coming into space this year. The first launches of the Italian Iride constellation is expected towards the end of the year. The first launches of the Greek wildfire detection constellation is expected towards the end of the year, and some more commercially driven InCube satellites that will also come and be launched this year. Next slide. Protecting our planet and climate includes also planetary defense. You see here some of the highlights of this year. The Fly-Eye telescope will be built up in Sicily. Ramses, I've informed you already last year about phase 1 that we have started with contributions from ESA member states. And we are currently discussing also contributions from international partners, in particular JAXA is preparing a major contribution yet to be decided and funding decisions to be made, but we are in very good discussions, but also NASA and obviously our own ESA member states where we ask for the second phase funding at the ministerial, very important mission, as you know, looking at the arrival of Apophis in 2029. You see here in the middle, Hera is on its way to Didymos. You see the flyby of Mars, which will happen this year. This is a simulation, obviously, but this is certainly a highlight of Hera on its way to the asteroid. And on the right-hand side, the Zero Debris Charter is not something that costs a lot of money, but is extremely important as an activity. And ESA has taken leadership in globally in raising the awareness of space debris. And there are a number of companies and countries who have signed up already to the charter, which is quite impressive and I would almost say surprising that such a large amount and such an interest has been gained through this Zero Debris Charter. We are regularly discussing with those signatories and obviously potential signatories what we can do and how we can together work on the reduction of debris. A lot of activities ongoing, but this is something that we have developed together with the community. About 40 partners have been developing the text of this charter. We are the secretariat, but certainly this is community work and not only work of ESA. Next one. Explore and discover, the second goal in our strategy. Next slide. Shows some of the highlights we expect this year. Explore and discover obviously is space science, is exploration. You see on the left-hand side, the very first image of our 6th and final Mercury flyby that happened yesterday. So with this image you see here, and we will release it right away after this press conference. You will get all the details of this measurement, but you are the very first ones. You have the privilege of being the very first ones of seeing this very first image. As you can already see, very stunning images with a lot of information that has been obtained or will be obtained through these images. As you know, Pepe Colombo is a mission together with JAXA, ESA and JAXA, and we are arriving at Mercury in November 2026, and this is certainly a very important milestone that we had yesterday. On science, Euclid, we have all released some data already last year. You have all reported about them. Incredibly sharp and focused images, very impressive quality of the data. And this year, we plan the very first big data release in the first quarter. Obviously, you will all be informed, and this will certainly be a highlight of this year. Talking of data releases, Gaia is concluding its scientific observation cycle, is one of the largest missions, or one of the missions producing the largest amounts of data of the Milky Way in particular. Some call it mapping the Milky Way, like the Google of the Milky Way, with enormous amounts of observations, billions of stars and objects of the Milky Way, and also leading to a very large amount of scientific publications, actually one of the largest sources of scientific publications based on Gaia data. And SMILE will be ready for launch by the end of this year. It's a mission that we carry out together with our Chinese partners. The launch itself is most likely happening next year. We are negotiating right now the launch slot on Vega C, but it will be ready as of the end of this year. Next slide. Coming to exploration, we have the 3 destinations, low Earth orbit, Moon, and Mars. A number of activities are happening there. We have the second Axiom mission of an ESA astronaut of the reserve, which is planned towards the first half of this year. The date will be confirmed, obviously, with our partners and together with NASA. We continue the training of our astronaut reserves. They have already started last year. We continue our work on the FLY initiative. That means being able of flying a professional astronaut for long duration to the ISS with a physical disability. John McFall, as you have all followed very closely, has been undergoing this study, and we have worked with him on exactly that. Of course, we have yet to identify the funding for this mission, but we're doing all the groundwork to make sure that potentially he could fly on a longer mission. We are launching the atomic clock, ACES. We are also continuing and proceeding with the commercial cargo return service developments. We have 2 contracts with 2 companies, as you know, and we are preparing work, obviously, during phase 1, but also funding for phase 2 at the ministerial itself. On exploration to the moon, we are delivering the ESM number 4 to the Space Kennedy, US Kennedy Space Center. On Argonaut, we are signing contracts with for the lunar descent element. On Moonlight, we really start the design phase and the work. Lunar Pathfinder is at the end of its assembly and testing phase, and the lunar facility, we will install on the lunar facility what we call the lunar gravity system. That means that the astronauts will be simulating also gravity as it is on the moon surface based on the system that is being installed. On Mars, we have 2 major activities ongoing. ExoMars, obviously, nominally proceeding for launch in 2028, and Mars Sample Return, where we work with our colleagues, partners, and friends of the United States, with NASA, where we are redefining, or where NASA has been reassessing the architecture of Mars Sample Return. I'm sure you have all followed very closely the press statements this week, which have been given, and what was reported afterwards. We are very closely involved in this discussion. We will have our teams assessing some of the results of these studies together with the teams of NASA. There are sessions planned together with our NASA and ESA teams, and we are planning to consolidate our ESA position in discussion with our member states by the March-April timeframe. Next slide, please. Next goal is strengthening European autonomy and resilience. Next slide, please. Here we are focusing on launches. You see, of course, the ramp up of Ariane 6 and Vega C, as I mentioned already, but also the launcher challenge. This year we'll have very important milestones. We will launch the ITT in the first quarter of this year, where we invite companies to submit their proposals, which we need after the evaluation to prepare our funding proposals for the ministerial. This work is going very well with our member states, obviously, but also with the European Commission in order to agglomerate the requirements for the satellites that can be launched with these future micro launchers. We actually do hope to see some of these micro launchers come and have their maiden flight this year. On space, on Prometheus and Themis, we do hop tests this year. There has been a very important engine test of Prometheus at the end of last year, just before Christmas. And on Space Rider, we are planning drop tests later this year. Again, very important for the development of Space Rider. Next slide. Is on, again, on autonomy and resilience. Here we have navigation. The Galileo program is proceeding extremely well. I remind everyone that the navigation, the accuracy of the navigation signal, or the positioning signal, which is coming from the Galileo constellation, is the most accurate in the world today. We keep improving our technologies and expanding our activities. We have been receiving funding for LEO PNT, and there will be a first demonstration foreseen towards the end of this year or possibly next year. That's why you see a TBC in brackets here on the date. but certainly there we are expanding quite significantly. We will reach the initial operational capability of Galileo PRS towards the end of this year, and also the Galileo emergency warning satellite service towards the end of the year. IRIS², of course, extremely important. We signed the agreement with the SpaceRISE Consortium, as you have all witnessed at the end of last year. This will be a very decisive year in designing the constellation, the architecture, doing critical technology validation activities, and meeting some of the milestones. There will be an important review point at the end of this year, as you know, as foreseen in the consortium, and this is very intense work that we will engage this year. But also, we will offer preliminary or precursor services based on geostationary telecom satellites through GovSatcom, and they will be offered throughout this year as we will prepare, obviously, for the future IRIS² connectivity program, together and under the lead of the European Commission and the European Union. Next one. On civil security and resilience, more and more activities require observations from space, especially in case of crisis. You see here two examples where we had storms this year in Valencia and in Poland. And in both cases, it is obvious that we need to intensify our activities along the way in such situations. That means our satellites we have a number of commercial constellations or satellites that are already providing information. We are discussing right now with our partners, with the European Commission, on how we could intensify and build up something more robust and more operational in the sense of having a higher density. This is all work in progress, but certainly something where we recognize that autonomy, resilience are important parameters, also in the light, of course, of the new commissioner's mandate, where we have to see what is needed and how this works. Next slide. Boosting European growth and competitiveness. Next slide, please. So this is focusing on the commercialization and the innovation part. You see on the left-hand side some elements of the commercialization efforts that we are undertaking. More and more, ESA will be an anchor customer or service customer, where we let industry develop its activities and drive the innovation. And we are applying also different ways of how we handle geo-return, a very big element of our transformation process. We have informed you after the last council that there are a number of elements in progress on making sure that we are more dynamic, more flexible, more agile in interacting with industry also in this respect. We have defined 4 mission categories, meaning from a fully defined and fully developed ESA mission, as we have them typically for space science. Euclid is one example, but also New Athena will be another one, where we really define the mission beginning to end. And this is more the classical way of how we have been developing missions towards all, I would say, industry-driven missions where we are more an anchor customer. But do not misunderstand the term customer. It is not that we just sit there, sign a check and wait for the delivery. Also, when we are an anchor customer, we know that it needs very close interactions, technical advice, technology development, sometimes support in project management, in order to help industries to really gear up, be mature, so that we can at the end be an anchor customer buying a product, but still leaving industry the freedom, but helping them along the way technically in order to achieve their goals. On SMEs and on the business networks, you see in the bottom left a very high number of companies that we have established through the ESA Peak network. Is by far the largest in Europe. I think it's one of the largest worldwide. 1,570 companies have been established over the last 20 years. A huge success and very much appreciated by many SMEs. Also, more and more private funding is being attracted. We have created the new Directorate of Commercialization, as you know. And within the Directorate, we are really working quite intensely in signing contracts, in signing MOUs, letters of intent with venture capital companies, funding entities, 61 to date. They are having assets under management of roughly 850 billion, but they are quite an important source of private funding that comes more and more into European industry. And I really would like to say a big thank you for all the good efforts that have been made by my team, but obviously also by the companies who are participating in this. Also, industrial policy, I mentioned already that we are reviewing it and we are really working very hard, but also in being faster, time to contract, we would like to reduce the time to contract by 50%. We have already achieved a reduction of time to hire. That means hiring new colleagues in ESA of 42%. So we have been really being much faster and have accelerated the time it takes from announcing a new job opportunity to signing a contract with a new candidate, and been really making huge progress there. On innovation, you see here AI and quantum. These are two domains I've highlighted as priorities for future evolution. I've asked my director of technology to develop a roadmap for both of them. They are now being developed, and we will prepare proposals also for the ministerial in order to really make sure that we are on the edge of new developments and new technologies as they are being applied and implemented for space. Next one. Yeah, Inspire Europe. Obviously, space has a very large inspirational element. Next slide shows some of the activities that we undertake. Obviously, we have a lot of activities. Communication is one of them, but also with higher education institutions, with universities. I'm establishing cooperations with the networks of universities which we have in Europe. There are two in particular, one more focused on engineering, the other more focused on research that exist already, and I've already met them last year, but I really would like to come with a funding proposal also how to interact and intensify our interaction with the research establishments across Europe. Then we have obviously a very large amount of activities to inform politicians, to inform citizens about the state of our planet, about climate, about the universe, and this really is always creating very large excitement and very large inspiration for Europe. Next slide. Yeah, for you, especially for you journalists, you of course follow us very closely throughout the year. There are some of the events that are upcoming. I'm sure you have them all on your calendar already, but we will be very present in all of them, the ones you see here, and many, many more that are not on this list. So this is really something I'm putting an emphasis and a focus on, also with the reorganized communications team under the lead of Anne-Sophie. We really want to make sure that we provide the information to you that you need. If you need more, if you need different information, ask us, because we are here to serve you with information, but also with exciting stories and projects which we would like to show to you. And as usual, you see at the bottom here, after each council meeting, which is more discussing the programmatic elements, obviously we continue our media sessions that are always extremely helpful. And there are many other opportunities which, of course, we are very happy and very much looking forward to interact. Next slide. So there are now two slides that show the timeline, what happens over there. I'm not going through them now again because I've explained them before, but just that you have on two slides a bit of an overview of when happens what. Be aware that these are indicative timelines, so they obviously, for good reasons, will be adjusted to the needs. I've mentioned them all. Maybe the one I did not mention is the opening of the high-performance facility in Esrin. We will have a high-performance computer. For the first time ever that ESA is having that. We will inaugurate it in March in Esrin. Of course, you will be invited to this event, which is, I think, quite important to also make sure that we are having our own tools to develop algorithms to utilize the computing capability for the huge amounts of data and digital processes which we have. Next slide shows the second half of this year, again with the highlights and the milestones I've mentioned already before. Obviously, the CMIN 25 is the highlighter where we programmatically come with a new set of proposals. Some of the elements you see on the right-hand side might go into 26. I just want to be very transparent with you, especially the first LEO PNT demonstration flight. We aim for a launch towards the end of this year, possibly early next year. All the other elements are firmly planned for this year. Next slide. Yeah, this concludes my introduction. Thank you so much. I would like to put your attention on the sentence on the European Space Agency, elevating the future of Europe. This is exactly what we want to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Director General. Now we'll open the floor to questions. I would like to give the opportunity for those in the room first to ask a question, if any. Otherwise, Could you please raise your hand? Yes, please, and please state your name and media before you speak. Thank you so much.
Frédéric Castel, Radio Canada and other media. After the spectacular trio alliance between Musk, Trump, and Isaac Mann, are you worried about some changes, among other changes, about the moon exploration strategy? And if the SLS, for example, is cancelled because of its cost, how to handle for Europe the lunar getaway? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Of course, we are very carefully and very closely interacting with our colleagues and friends in the United States. It's not for me, first of all, to comment on other countries' political orientations and space programs. This is for them to answer. But what I can say is that we are certainly prepared for any scenarios that might come to the table. More than that, we are in very close exchange every single day with our colleagues of NASA, in particular, on some of the aspects that you mentioned. You have mentioned SLS as one particular case. This is not for me to comment, but this is really, I think you should ask these questions to those who are operating and developing these infrastructures. But what I can say is that ESA and Europe will be ready to adjust, to find its own priorities, which are certainly linked to increasing our strength, our autonomy, our capacities in space, and also be a very good partner internationally with our different countries. Thank you.
Excuse me, to put my question in other terms, is there another way to handle the lunar getaway without the SLS?
Let me hand over the Director of Human and Robotic Exploration with me, Daniel Neuenschwander. And Daniel, please, if you could go a bit deeper on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. And to go to your question, Frederic, the case of SLS, if cancelled, would impact ESA only if no other launcher could transport Orion and ESM together to lunar orbit. That's the point, and you'll see from this reply that we are studying options and we are exchanging also these options with our partners, first and foremost NASA. In summary, for exploration, there is a lot at stake. So we have three key points: foresight, flexibility, alignment. Foresight to work on what-if scenarios, flexibility to adapt the pace of implementation, and alignment with the member states in order to have one Europe, one voice.
Thank you. Now I will take a question online. Actually, Ludwig Jovanovic from Rheinische Post had the very same question, but he had another one, which was, have you spoken with Isaac Mann yet? And secondly, a question regarding elections in Germany. There's no fiscal planning yet. And what does that mean for ESA and the coming budget?
Oh, thank you. Mr. Isaac Mann, I have not yet met him formally. I had a casual interaction because when he was training for Axiom 1, they passed through the ESA Astronaut Center in Cologne. I happened to be there at the same time, and we had a few very short exchanges of words, but very friendly, but very informal, very short. But we did not have yet any formal meeting. Of course, as everyone knows, he is nominated by the President-elect of the United States, but the nomination process is yet to go on. But certainly, as soon as the formal nomination will be confirmed, I would be very quick to seek an appointment with him to sit down and really see what we do together and how we work together as NASA and ESA. Sorry, and the second question was on the elections in Germany. As always, so there are always elections in different countries of ESA member states. We always follow them very closely. We work with the existing government. We work with all the players in the different countries, and whatever new government will be elected in Germany, I'm very confident and really look forward to engage with them as quick as possible once confirmed.
Thank you. Another question from the room, maybe? Yes, Anne?
Yes, sorry. Do you have already an idea of the range of the...
Les Échos.
Oh, sorry. Do you have already an idea about the range of the augmentation you would like to have in your budget, and how can you plead for a big augmentation if you don't have anything to do with the defense issue, since you just shown that the main augmentation of the budget in US is coming from defense? And what kind of relationships can the agency have with this subject?
Very good question. Thank you, and for this. As you have clearly seen from my presentation and also the diagrams I've shown, there's an implicit message there that Europe has to catch up and Europe has to accelerate in terms of investments in space. This is very obvious. If you ask me for a number, of course, this is a number that needs to be developed and discussed with the member states. It's not, we can make proposals, but funding comes from the ESA member states. But certainly, despite the difficulties we see across Europe in all the countries, I think there's a general recognition that space is so strategic and is so important for all the countries of Europe that politicians, ministers, when we come to the ESA ministerial, will recognize this importance and certainly fund the programs accordingly. Your second point is on more on the defense side or security side. There's a new commissioner in Brussels in charge of defense and space. He is starting his work right now. As you know, he is very busy in looking into the defense aspects, but also he has clearly recognized that space is an intrinsic element of also defense. And I'm certainly looking forward to future discussions, in particular with the new commissioner and with my member states on how this evolution goes. It's too early, of course, today to say and to see where this develops. This is not for me to say or to drive. This is for the member states to decide and for the European Commission as our partner to discuss with. But I think it is fair to say that there will be evolutions expected, as I say, based on the larger political context. And I can only say that ESA is ready to engage. ESA has the capability to engage and to work on it. We already work on many projects that are having a security dimension. I have introduced to you the BRS signal, where we have, which is a very clear and a very good example where we do it, but there are several others. Iris Square is the next one where already we work in this domain. So we have the mandate, we have the mandate means the legal framework, we have the capability, but the decisions, I underline, are with our member states and obviously most likely also in close coordination and cooperation with the European Commission.
This actually answers Camille Cerise-Guessant de l'Agence Europe question. Unless you want to complement it, please join the team. Now there's a question from Gregor Waszyński from Handelsblatt. You said in October that ESA was in talks with SpaceX to join the Zero Debris Charter. Are those talks still ongoing? And is SpaceX still a potential signatory? And second half of the question is, how does the increasingly confrontational approach of SpaceX founder Elon Musk towards Europe impact ESA and the Zero Debris talks? And I will complement with a similar question from Pierre Barthélemy Le Monde. Given Elon Musk's aggressive stance towards various European countries, does the question of continuing to work with SpaceX arise?
No, thank you. On your first question on zero debris and the talks with SpaceX, yes, SpaceX has been participating in the discussions in drafting the Zero Debris Charter. I mentioned before that we had about 40 different partners who have been working on the drafting of the text. They have not yet signed, as you know. So these discussions are ongoing. Between the October time when I mentioned it and today, there has been not any change, any major progress on this. I think SpaceX right now is very busy with preparing for the Starship launches. But this is certainly something that we will continue pursuing. I just did not have yet a chance or my teams to further interact on that, but certainly something that is quite important. Your other question was on Mr. Musk himself. I'm not commenting on that. This is not for me to do so. We are seeing SpaceX as a partner to launch spacecraft as and if needed, and therefore we see it purely from that perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Any question from the room, maybe? Yes, please.
Hello, Daniel Chrétien for Futura Science in France. I have a question about the training of Sophia No. What is planned for this year, 2025, and until what is planned for 2025 for her training until her first flight on ISS?
Thank you. I can assure you that we are on track, as already mentioned some earlier times, for her flight in the first quarter of next year. Obviously, the date will be defined and agreed with the partners of the space station. But maybe I'd like to hand over again to Daniel to give a bit more insight on where we are exactly on the training schedule and some more background. And Daniel can also say a word on the next flight, which is Rafael. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Joseph. Sophie is right now in a very intense training. There's a time between her mission assignment by the Director General until her mission, which is planned in spring 2026. The time is quite compressed, so she is mainly based in Houston for mission-specific training after having gone through the whole EVA training in Houston as well, extravehicular activities. There is part of this training, there are different spots around the world to be visited. End of last year, she was in Canada. I recall that we visit all the partners of the International Space Station to operate the specific contributions. In this spirit, she will leave towards Russia in a couple of days as well. Russia being part of the International Space Station, every astronaut on board of the station must have the basic knowledges in order to be an active and successful member there. And in this context, she will go a couple of days there and then go back to Houston in order to train for the perspective of the flight next spring. In sequence, DG also assigned Raphaël Liégeois for a mission to the International Space Station. The time for the mission of Raphaël will be assessed considering the current transport scenario and accession to the International Space Station, to be seen also in context of the CFT challenges of last year. So we have to adapt a bit the timing, but it is planned to be done in sequence towards the end of 2026.
Thank you. Emma Gatti from Spacewatch Global is asking, is it confirmed that geo return will be ended, and will this be implemented in 2025?
I like the spirit of the question. I hand over to Geraldine, but let me just reassure you what I said also after the briefing of the ESA Council, or at the ESA Council briefing session. Geo-return, of course, is a fundamental of ESA and will not change. This is crystal clear, but we are working a lot on changing the implementation of it, simplifying it, making it more dynamic and more easier for industry to work with. But the principle as such, of course, is a very important one. But I would even say it's not unexpected. If a member state or anyone is funding some activities, there's a return expected. And I think this is exactly the principle of geo-return. But Geraldine is much more qualified to explain some of the future evolutions we have in mind. We take it very serious because I think the discussion that is ongoing is a very strategic one, is a very important one. And adapting geo-return as one element is part of this process. But over to you, Geraldine.
Thank you, Joseph. Yes, I confirm the geo-return is clearly a fundamental principle of ESA and indeed something that is expected. However, what we are going to change is the way it is implemented. Right now, already some programs of ESA are following the so-called guaranteed return or are adapting the contributions of the member states to the outcome of industrial competitions, and that's what we would like to generalize. So to make the return fully compatible with competition and therefore with industrial competitiveness. So the idea is to more and more start with industrial competition, build the industrial consortium, and adapt the contributions of the member states accordingly. So the geo-return in that case becomes even more than now an indicator of competitiveness of countries' industry. And that's the spirit in which we are working. Also, as Joseph said, simplifying, let's say, reducing the number of lines, for instance, on which geo-return is computed, and generally simplifying the processes like we do also for contracts, regulations, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. A question from the room? Yes, okay. Yes, maybe, yeah. I wanted to give the floor to someone else because I already had the chances to ask a question, but yes.
Hi, Rache Bosmeyer, DPA. So you said you want to clear the path for a first mission of the para-astronaut. I would like to know what amount of funding would be needed for this project. When would you like it to be secured, and when could a mission potentially take place? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, this is again something I'd like to hand over to Daniel. Yeah, Daniel, over to you.
Thank you, DG. So first and above all, mission of an astronaut with a physical disability is not fundamentally costing much more. What needs to be done is to do all the study work upfront, and this is exactly what we have done last year. We conducted the FLY study in order to assess, can a para-astronaut go through a long-duration space missions. We will conclude this reporting this year and go in sequence with a new phase, which is called mission ready, in order to look to the specific points to be adapted. There are, you're right, some adaptations to be done. For example, if you need to enter with a prosthesis in a spacesuit, there are some minor adaptations, but the overall cost are in a similar range than the one for another classical astronaut mission. Now, about the perspective, we have the International Space Station available. Currently, we are engaged until 2030. We will assess if we will find a flight opportunity in this context. But of course, we're also assessing other and additional flight opportunities.
A question online now regarding there's two concerning space transportation and on the launches of Ariane 6 and Vega C. From Torsten Christening, Spacewatch Global. The first commercial flight 6 was presented for Q1 this year now. The first A64 was presented for Q4 2025. How many A62 flights are planned for 2025? Are the 6 flights for 2025 towards the end of the year after still on the agenda? Again, now this timeline was indicative, but I'm sure DG and Tony will come back on that. And a similar question on Vega C from Robert Wolf from Aviation Week. How many launches on Vega C are planned for this year?
No, thank you. I hand over to Tony to go and explain some of the issues of the manifest, but one comment up front. Ariane 6 and Vega C are now under commercial exploitation. That means Arianespace and in the future Avio are responsible for these launches. What we do as ESA is, of course, supporting the development of upgrades. You mentioned Ariane 6-4 in particular, and there, of course, we are making sure that this is happening on time as required. But the ultimate responsibility is with the operators, the commercial operators of both launches. But I'd like to hand over to Tony.
Thank you, DT. Yes, we did plan the second flight, the first commercial flight of Ariane 6 towards the end of the year. It has slided slightly. We have had very detailed analysis of the maiden flight, and we have obviously discovered a few anomalies and things that needs to be corrected, and this has led to this slippage until February for the second flight. For the whole 25 of Ariane 6, we are foreseeing 5 flights now, and one of them will be an Ariane 6-4, and for Vega we are foreseeing 4 flights this year. Vega C.
Thank you. A question from the yes.
Meunier, lacroniquespatiale.com. Can you tell us who will be the first passenger for Ariane 6-4?
Yes, it's Kuiper. Kuiper.
A question online from Robert Hall, Aviation Week again. On more simple return, you say a consolidated position. What does that mean? Is that which of the two options ESA would prefer? And to follow on Anne Bauer's question, there is more and more talk about defense going to 3%, maybe even more. Do you worry that it will dry up money available in Europe, Canada, and USA?
Well, thank you. Let me respond to the defense question, and on MSR, I hand over to Daniel again. Okay, first of all, these are decisions of our member states as regards the ESA member states on how much money they allocate to defense activities as regards to other activities. I think this is really something that we have to see the evolution, but I repeat what I said during my presentation, that we have a commissioner in charge of defense and space in Europe, which links these two domains. I would expect that in many member states, the integration of space into defense capabilities will increase. And this is, of course, the member states' choice and decision to what extent ESA will play a role there in development of technologies, activities, and so on. As I said, this is something that we're doing already. We are already working on PRS, Galileo, on RS2, and many other activities. So this is really a decision that will be a political decision by member states and the European Commission. And on MSR, Daniel, please.
Thank you, DG. So on Mars sample return, there are two relevant landing options. One is a sky crane option, and one is a commercial heavy lander option. This is currently what is assessed by NASA. From the European Space Agency point of view, we are, of course, committed to our contributions, which is the Earth Return Orbiter. The Earth Return Orbiter plays a key role in the architecture, and we stay also committed, of course, to a timely delivery for a launch as of 2030. In one of these scenarios, in the sky crane scenarios, the other European contribution, the sample transfer arm, would not be needed. We recall here that we developed top-notch robotic capabilities, and we will keep these skills definitely in Europe, and will assess if this scenario would materialize, what type of application or what type of redirection we could do with the STA. So if you ask the European Space Agency which option we would favor, we would certainly favor where we can maximize the European skills and the contributions, but ultimately we'll favor what our member states will decide.
Thank you. Daniel, you want to ask a question, please?
Thank you. Let's discuss about the post-ISS era. In your 2040 strategy, I suppose you began to discuss about that. Do you plan to discuss about what next after ISS during the next ministerial in Bremen?
So did I understand you correctly? What's next after Ariane 6, correct? ISS, sorry, after ISS. So yes, of course we do. There are several commercial options, as you know, that are being developed. Some of them involve European partners, and we are since the years, so since some time already in very close discussion with them. And yes, this will be part of our proposals towards the ministerial. So this is all work ongoing. As you perfectly know, the CLD decision probably on the side of the US is expected next year, but we are working with all these partners along this line. Maybe one point I would like to also raise here is that we are planning a milestone in 2027. That would be about a year before the next ministerial afterwards. So the one 28, we're assuming 28 is the next ministerial, which would also look a bit, I would say, the more programmatic aspects of European elements towards the implementation of various activities, and certainly all the activities on LEO, but also Moon Mars will be discussed there. Daniel, you want to compliment?
We have a question from Peter Deselding from Space Intel Report. Peter, can you please connect?
Oh, hello, hello.
Yes,
Hi.
we hear you.
All right, thanks. Good morning. A couple of questions. First, on the budget figures you gave today, are those to be considered definitive or more or less definitive? I know in December you'd said a couple of parliaments had yet to formalize their commitment, and so we shouldn't look at those figures as final. But are the slides today considered final? A second question on IRIS-2. The more you look at IRIS-2, the tighter the schedule looks, and 2030 looks really, really difficult to reach. On the ESA budget, there was something like 550 million euros that was held in abeyance from CM 2022, waiting for the Commission to sign the concession agreement. That was done in December. So my question is, how much of that 550 can be ventilated out to industry on the ESA side in 2025, and how much of it has to wait for this milestone now planned for December of 2025? Because there's a lot that the Commission doesn't know about the contract and won't know until the end of 2025. And then just a slight request on your 2025 to-do slide. I think there was a typo in the spelling of the name of Commissioner Kubilius. If you could correct that so that we don't ventilate that typo out further, that'd be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. We'll correct it immediately.
Okay, no, thank you, Peter. And I have to check the typo, the wording again. But on the budget, 7.7 billion. Yes, this is the figure that was decided at ESA Council. I think it was said by Marco Ferrazzani already at the December Council, or at the briefing after the December Council, that we do expect some budgetary decisions to come in the next weeks. The UK was mentioned as one example, but also others. So we do expect this figure to slightly increase. It will not be drastically increasing, but slightly increasing. Maybe it's going a bit closer to the 8 billion at the end of the year. But this is not unusual, and this is something that is part of the national processes, which of course have an impact then on the ESA budget. So yes, the figure is the one as confirmed today, but there is a good likelihood that that will be a slight increase. On IRIS Square and the ESA portion, the 550 million, how much of this will be spent this year? I would like to hand over to Laurent. Thank you.
Thank you, DG. Thank you, Peter. For IRIS Square, the 550 million ESA partnership project is focusing on what we call the critical technology, the low TRL, low technology readiness level. And we will see subcontracts being placed by the consortium SpaceRise to industry to initiate the development of these critical technologies. So at this stage, I do not have a precise number to give. We are hoping to see industry being placed on the contract throughout the year. The targets that we have with SpaceRise is to contract up to 85% of the entire supply chain by the end of this year. So progressively, we will start.
Thank you. A question from the room? Anne Boer?
Yes, can we have a small comment about the decision of, or maybe decision or not decision, we don't know yet, of Italy to go with Starlink? Is it an obstacle to the development of IRIS Square, since even if Italy is in a much better economic situation, they have budget constraint also?
Thank you. This is Italy's decision, so it's not for me to comment on Italy's decision, but let me just underline and lay out, as I mentioned also in my presentation, there will be a precursor service offered this year based on geostationary satellites called GovSatcom, which will be made available to our member states, obviously Italy being a member of this activity. The other point is that Italy is very strongly engaged in IRIS Square, has a very clear and very definitive role in the industrial consortium. And I assume that this is certainly something quite attractive also to Italy and Italian industry. But as regards their arrangements or their discussions, ongoing discussions with SpaceX, this is not for me to comment. I don't know, do you want to add something, Laurent? No, thank you.
Yes, please.
Christophe Batteria pour France Télévisions, pour French TV. Ariane Next is not in your presentation today. What about this project?
I assume by Ariane Next you mean what happens after Ariane 6?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, but the path is very clearly laid out. We have made decisions in Sevilla in November 2023, where we have decided that we will, through the European Launcher Challenge, develop the next generation launcher after Ariane 6 and possibly also after Vega C. And this is the process that was laid out before. We will issue an ITT soon, around the February timeframe this year, to call for proposals for the new micro launchers as they are today. And over the years, we will help develop them to get larger. That means launching from a few hundred of kilograms towards a few tons of kilograms, and therefore reach the level of Ariane 6 today. This will take time, but certainly the process is clearly laid out. We have made the decisions, the programmatic, the political decisions. We now have to implement them step by step, as we are doing through the European Launcher Challenge and the ministerial funding that we are proposing for that.
We have a question from Marie-Ange Tanguy from Space and Exploration. As Ariane 6 is a little bit late and the launch limit of the Amazon constellation was the end of 2026, did you negotiate a new deadline for this 18 A6 launches?
I don't know, Tony, can you comment on this? This is really something for Arianespace to comment, but Tony, over to you.
Yeah, you are right. It's Arianespace domain, but so far the 18 Kuiper launch is still in the manifest of Ariane 6. So there's not been any changes to that, even though the schedule has been changing.
Pierre Barthélémy from Le Monde. Can we have more details about FlyEye, the exact commissioning date, the cost, the scientific objectives, and complementary with the Vera Rubin Observatory?
Well, thank you. I've seen that Rolf Denzing is online. Rolf, can I hand over to you remotely?
Yes, happy to help answer this. So the FlyEye telescope is built not with scientific objectives in mind, but it's to observe near-Earth objects that could potentially become dangerous to Earth. It is sensitive down to 20 magnitudes. It has 16 very sensitive CCD elements. It has a large field of view of, if I'm not mistaken, 45 square degrees. And it would, in one night, scan half of the night sky for near-Earth objects. So it's a pretty powerful tool. And as I said, not with primarily scientific objectives. It's operational planetary defense telescope. Now, the telescope itself is ready to go. It has passed the factory acceptance test. However, the sites need a bit more preparation. I must say the primary sponsor of this telescope is Italy and ESA. And the idea is to give it a temporary home in Matera, Italy, where it would be readied and optimized for the transfer eventually to Monte Mufara in Sicily, which is a very good site for astronomical observations. Already there is a telescope, the site is there, but it's tricky to prepare the place where it will at the end ultimately be end up, because we are talking Sicily and the national sanctuary. So with all the eventualities that you have when you want to build in a natural sanctuary, and then at the same time, Italy being the prime sponsor, so this should be taken into account as well. I hope I have answered the complementarity to other telescopes. Well, the benchmark is the PenSTARRS camera of NASA, and I believe it's operated out of the NASA Hawaii observatories, which is also a very good site, and we would complement each other NEO for NEO observations, for operational NEO observations. I hope I could answer all your questions.
Very much, Rolf. We're heading towards the end of the press conference. We have no questions online anymore. Maybe I would like to give the opportunity. Yes.
Hi, Ross Cullen from Feature Story News. What's your assessment of the private sector going forward? Are you satisfied with what you see in terms of investments from the private sector? You've mentioned commercialization in terms for ESA and working with private funding. You've also mentioned in some of your earlier answers, SpaceX. So what would you like to see? Are you satisfied? What's your assessment of the private space sector in Europe?
Well, thank you. That's a very important question, and I really appreciate that. What I see is, first of all, I think we have made enormous progress in call it waking up some of the potential that we have in Europe. The network that I've shown to you of 61 funding entities, most of them venture capital companies, being part of our ESA investor network is a big achievement, and I think this is really going in the right path. But you are absolutely right. The world is spinning very fast around us, and I think we have to make sure that we are, certainly also from a European perspective, making good use of the opportunities there are. Globally speaking, the space economy is growing very well and very fast. You know the figures that are discussed in the different places, from roughly 500 billion size of space economy today to 1.8 trillion in the next decade. That makes an average growth of around 10% per year. And there are not many economic sectors that have this strong growth figures, and meaning that there's a lot of potential using space technologies for a number of applications. So yes, I certainly will work very hard with my team to increase the funding share from the private sector. This is clear that this will drive in the future developments in the future. And yes, absolutely, we would like to look also for larger investments also the European side.
We actually have a last question online from Marta Meli, Sky Telegiornale. Marta, can you ask your question, please?
You hear me?
Very well, thank you.
It's for Director General Joseph Ashpacher. Thanks for your time, Director. ESA, in the last days, especially in Italy, has been involved in the debate related to the advantage of reusable rockets compared to the delay of the Ariane program. What is the position of the agency related to this debate? Thanks.
Thank you, Marta, and buongiorno to Italy. What is our position? We are working on reusable launchers. As you know, I've mentioned the Prometheus and Themis activities that are planned this year. There will be hop tests planned this year based on Themis. And we are on a good path towards reusable rockets through especially using the Prometheus engine. So yes, this is certainly something that is top priority for Europe and for us as ESA to engage and to further develop. There are several other companies, what we call micro launchers today, that are planning to have reusable engines, reusable rockets. This is something that we would like to develop through the European Launcher Challenge.
Thank you very much. This is the end of the press conference. We have a different, yes, Stefan, sorry.
Stefan Berensky from Aerospatium. Happy New Year to everyone. I had two technical questions, very different one from the other. You say you will reduce by 50% the time to contracting. I've seen that several times, so I'd like to know from which reference year to which objective. And second question, maybe for Tony Tucker-Nielsen, do we have any news of what is going on with the Peace 160? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. On the first point on the time to contract, the reference year is December 23, and we have already been working on this. I have to say that we have not yet achieved what we wanted to achieve in terms of time to contract, but this is certainly something that we are going towards today. But time to contract is only one measure of many measures to make the agency more agile. It has to do with all the processes that we have introduced during the implementation of missions. We have launched what we call fast track reviews for missions that have more of a commercial dimension. I've mentioned the time to hire, which is another parameter, another KPI that we have already achieved within 1 year to reduce it by 42%. I can give you the figures. It took in the past about a bit more than 6 months to hire somebody. That means the time between announcing a new position, publishing it, and then signing a contract, going through all the interview process, and so on. Today, this figure is a bit more than 3 months. On average, despite a record number of people we have hired last year, more than 300 positions have been filled last year, which is quite a large number. This is part of the overall transformation process, which I've initiated actually not last year, but the year before, and where we have identified several specific measures. I mentioned time to contract is something that is very visible and easy to measure, but there's a lot of activities throughout the house where we really work in improving the interactions between ESA and our member states, between ESA and industry, and obviously internally in terms of our own procedures we have in place. And on the second question is for Tony.
Yeah, if I understand correctly, the question was on the P160. What is the status? So first, it might be a bit cryptic to many of you. What is P160? So we are increasing the size, the loading of the solid rocket boosters of Ariane 6, which is also the first stage of Vega, from 120 to 160 ton, to increase the Ariane 6 mission, calling it Block 2, the 2 tons to Leo. And it's going very well. We are doing the qualification, first firing test in March this year.
Thank you very much, Tony. Is there any question left? Otherwise, okay, perfect. So we're going to close the press conference. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for those online that have been following us. The replay will be available, as I said, in 1 hour or 2, and we've shared already with you the presentation that was made by the Director General at the beginning of this media briefing. Thank you very much and have a very good day.